Yeah, I mean, I think any journey you go on, no matter how woke you think you are, you're going to have preconceptions, and it's really important to have to be open to thinking of how can you explore those preconceptions and have them shatter.
What is up, everyone? I am Tom Ball, and this is Second Mind, the show that empowers you to be the best version of yourself and better our world. Today, I'm joined by Ash Bhardwaj. Ash is a travel writer, filmmaker, and storyteller who explores the world with curiosity, excitement, and a sense of adventure. Just to name a few of his accomplishments, he has traveled 8,500 kilometers through 11 countries along Russia's European border, retraced World War II secret missions through Albania's mountains on foot, walked 800 kilometers through India on the TV documentary Walking The Himalayas, meeting the Dalai Lama along the way. And he's even walked 1,100 kilometers through Uganda and Sudan with Levison Wood on the documentary Walking The Nile, including the first summer crossing of the Bayuda Desert. He has written for the Daily Telegraph, the Times and the Huffington Post, and has produced programs for Channel 4 and the BBC. Ash, welcome to the show.
Cheers, Tom. Good to see you.
No worries, no worries. I just wanted to start off by going into where your drive for travel and adventure has come from. Is this something that has cumulatively built up through your younger years?
I think there were probably two places where it started off, and the first was, as a kid, I was fascinated by space. My uncle worked for JPL, which is the R&D wing of NASA, if you like. So I was always fascinated with space. I always used to go to the Science Museum or the Natural History Museum with my mum's brother. I always loved the notion of discovery of the world and science. And I think that probably took me into a real interest in sci-fi. So that was probably really where my wonder about actual travel came from. Watching things like Star Trek: The Next Generation and thinking about these amazing journeys these guys were off on to explore strange new worlds. So I think that's really where my sense of adventure and travel that's where that interest really started. And when I was 16, I went to Windsor Boys School. It's the local comprehensive in Windsor, but it has a very good background in playing rugby. And every year they would do a rugby tour to every couple of years they do a rugby tour. And one of them was going to New Zealand. My mum got a second job working as a cleaner to pay for me to go to New Zealand. And I just absolutely loved it. I really relished it. It was the first time I'd been away from home on my own, and to go so far away and to see a culture that is familiar but has lots of differences, and particularly because of the Māori influence in New Zealand, you've got all of that coming in. So yeah, that was quite fascinating.
Wicked. I noticed that you've also, on a lot of your journeys or your earlier journeys, you used your hobbies as kind of a bridge to, like with the rugby. And I know that you've done some time as a ski instructor, and you also spent some time being a cowboy as well, which is one of your dreams as a kid. So have you found success with using your hobbies as a way to bridge your travel?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different ways you can be really inspired to go traveling. But where this came from was I was finishing university and I had no idea what I was really going to do after university. I switched from doing chemistry and molecular physics to philosophy, which meant that I was very well qualified to be unemployed and to sit around thinking, which is, I think, the main task of a philosopher. And I wasn't sure what I would do. I did one of those career quizzes that you can do, that you type in your favorite sport, where you like to spend time, what's your favorite color, how do you like your steak cooked, and then it spits out a series of career recommendations. I think I got prison officer, school teacher, and army officer training. I mean, the quiz was sponsored by the UK government and the Home Office, so probably going to guide you into the careers that they want people to go into. But I did my entrance exams for the army. I was going to go to Sandhurst to go and be a regular army officer. But there were three things I really wanted to do that kind of evolved as an idea whilst I was at university. and that was to go back to New Zealand to play rugby a bit more properly, to go and be a ski instructor in France, and to be a cowboy. So I set out, and in my year after university, achieved to varying levels of success all three of those things. I worked as a cowboy. Well, I worked on a farm in Tasmania, and then worked on a racehorse stud up in Queensland in Australia. Unfortunately, I then fell off a racehorse, and my plan to go and be a jackaroo, which is the Australian word for cowboy, up in the Northern Territory, that had to be put on ice because my hand was being put back together by a very good surgeon in Toowoomba. And then I moved to New Zealand, and I played rugby there because obviously playing rugby in New Zealand is safer than riding horses, barely. There's some big blokes down in the South Island. And whilst I was there, I trained as a ski instructor. So managed to tick off all three of those things, and played rugby just for fun at the local club. Trained as a ski instructor there, and then came back to be a ski instructor in Switzerland. So managed to get all three of those things done. And then I've been trying to work out what to do next ever since.
I think those words resonate with a lot of people who are coming out of university. I know the same was true for me in some stages, when you don't quite know what to do, but sometimes it's nice to just embrace that and then follow your interests, and they can take you to some unexpected but really cool situations.
Well, the other advantage of a hobby is it gives you a very good reason to get to know local people. Playing rugby in New Zealand, all the other guys that I was playing with were locals from that town, second, third generation from Wanaka. And they were farmers, or did local jobs, or they were builders, or they were, they worked on the lake. They weren't what most people are in a town like Wanaka or Queenstown, is temporary workers who are there for the ski season. So it just gave me a really good insight into genuine South Island Kiwi culture, which was brilliant. And then getting on the bus every weekend and driving around the South Island to go and play rugby in some of the most beautiful scenery in the world. It's a great way to get a different insight into a place. Same with Australia, working as a jackaroo and working out on farms, rather than just working in bars or getting drunk in Sydney. Not that there's anything wrong with that at all, but you just get a different insight that you may not otherwise have.
Yeah, I've definitely found that on my travels as well. When you're engaging with people on a local level with the activities that they're doing, it gives you an instant connection to people, and it really gives you a deeper understanding of how things run there. And it can often reflect a lot of thoughts back to how things work in your own country as well, which is always an interesting observation.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, definitely.
So you took a trip along the Russian border, an epic journey. Was this mostly on foot?
No, it was mostly on trains, actually. Most of the distance was on trains, but I did do quite a bit of walking where I could. So this was a journey which I termed the New Iron Curtain, and it was the primary reason for it was after I was sent to Estonia with the British Army Reserve. So it was part of a big deployment that the army undertook in 2017. Russia had invaded and annexed Crimea in 2014, which was part of Ukraine. And then it had basically secretly supported a war in eastern Ukraine. And the rest of Eastern Europe and NATO member states in particular that had formerly been part of the Soviet Union were concerned that Russia had interest in doing the same thing to them. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. Poland wasn't part of the Soviet Union, but it was still worried that Russia might do the same. So NATO undertook something called the Enhanced Forward Presence. So they sent a brigade of troops to Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland to deter Russian mischief, basically. So we've been sent as part of this deployment. It just made me very curious about how little we understand about recent history and the impacts that has on the world today in current affairs. In Estonia, the narrative of World War II is very different to ours. It's not about Germans being the bad guys, us being the good guys, and the Soviets helping us out. For them, they were an independent country that got invaded by the Soviet Union. The Germans were a group that they would have preferred. For them, the arrival of the Germans wasn't really any worse than what they were already undergoing under the Soviets, who'd already either killed or deported 2% of their population. And then the Soviets came back in again at the end of World War II and occupied them for 50 years. So the narrative of history is very different there. And I was just fascinated by these different complexities of history and these different complexities of ethnicity. You've got Russians and Russian Estonians and Estonian Estonians in Estonia, which isn't something I'd ever really considered or thought about before, that would be a problem. So I was just curious about the lives of the people that lived on this border and what the impact of the end of World War II and the Soviet Union was in this area. And I realised there were these problems going on all along that border. So I travelled overland from Norway, right where Norway touches Russia, up in the Arctic Circle, the end of the old Iron Curtain. And I went through Finland, St. Petersburg, in that region of Russia, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Kaliningrad, which is this area that used to be part of Germany, East Prussia, and then basically Red Army got in there at the very end of World War II, ethnically cleansed it of Germans and filled it with mostly Russians, but people from the other parts of the Soviet Union as well. So it's now part of Russia. So you've got this really odd island of Russia inside Europe. It's got Poland on one side and Lithuania on the other. And then into Poland, into Belarus. Belarus was amazing. I absolutely love Belarus. The most delightfully surprising place that I went to. Then to Ukraine, went to Kiev, went to Lviv, went to Chernobyl, went to Donbass, which is where the conflict is still going on in the east, and then went down through Odessa into Transnistria, which is the country that doesn't exist. It's this part of Moldova that's ethnically Russian and is kind of self-declared as its own state, into Moldova, and then back into Kiev, and then down into Russian-occupied Crimea. And I took trains for most of the route, just because it's an awesome way to travel in that part of the world, and it's a great way to experience their culture and that region's identity. A lot of it is a legacy of the Soviet Union, particularly in Ukraine and Belarus, obviously, and the Baltic states. But I did also walk for quite a bit. I walked from Poland into Belarus, which was amazing. I didn't think I could do that. People had told me that the Belarusians were very tight on their border control. So the fact that I just bimbled in there on foot, I mean, I'd sorted all my visas out beforehand, but that was great. I had a great time in Belarus. And then another region that I did a lot of walking in was Crimea. I walked across Moldova from one side to the other, and then down in Crimea, I just retraced the route of the 1854-55 Crimean War.
Fantastic. And along the way, you put together a series of podcasts that went out online. How did you come up with the concept for those podcasts? Was it a cultural focus that you had before you went, or were you open to spontaneity with picking up different themes along the journey?
Well, I mean, it was geopolitics and cultural alignment that had started that journey for me. Do people feel aligned to the West? Do people feel aligned to the East? How do they feel about NATO? How do they feel about Putin? You know, those are the sort of big questions. But the reality is those are big geopolitical questions. And, you know, I'm not going to answer those geopolitical questions. I'm not a foreign affairs analyst. I'm not in Chatham House or anything like that. But what I was intrigued by is what impact those big picture things had on the lives of local people along the way. What is it like being a Russian Estonian living in Narva? What is it like being an ethnic Seto living on the border of a land where half of your country has been taken by Russia? What's it like being a Russian Ukrainian living in Kiev? What's it like being a Russian Ukrainian living on the border of a conflict zone? So it was very much focused on the experiences of the people. But the podcast series was for the Telegraph Travel. So I think what has really been the golden thread through my journeys is to go to places that we think we know and reveal curious or interesting things about them. Because you're never going to know much about a country that's on the other side of Europe. Did you know that the Latvians have these amazing sauna rituals that are derivative of pagan Aryanism in the region? Or that in Finland they have lots of different types of sauna, and there's actually more sauna in Finland than there are people. So you've got these amazing little quirks of regional identity, and trying to draw those out and talk about them, because travel's all about the people you meet. Yes, it's magnificent landscapes and cool food, but it's very much the people that drive your experience and sense of place.
Must have been fascinating to hear the stories from those people, because in those geopolitical battles, there's this very much like push-pull with the borders, and there's you're right, there are those human identities at those borders which are on an individual level experiencing all of this change. And I'm sure it must have been the last 50 years must have been a very turbulent time for some of these areas where their identity seemed to shift on by the year.
Yeah, I mean, for Estonia, they never chose Soviet rule. It was foisted upon them, and then it was declared that they'd been invited in by the Estonians. But I mean, they hadn't. There'd been a few communists in Estonia that had invited them in, but effectively it was the force of the Red Army that guaranteed the Soviet Union stayed there. And actually in Estonia, there was this big event that happened in 2008, 2007, 7, 8. There's a statue in the middle of Tallinn, the capital city of Estonia, which is a monument to the Red Army soldiers who had died in the liberation of Tallinn. Now, to the Soviets and to ethnic Russian Estonians, most of whom moved there after the Soviet occupation, those soldiers, they're heroes, just as we honour the veterans that fought in World War II on the beaches of Normandy. To them, to the Russians, these were their grandfathers and fathers who died fighting fascism and liberating Europe. But to the Estonians, these were the soldiers that then came in and occupied them for 50 years. So there's really mixed feelings in Estonia about this. For the Estonians, this was a symbol of occupation. For the Russian Estonians who'd come in with the occupiers, this was a symbol of heroism and defense against fascism and the creation of a better world order. But the Estonians wanted it moved to a military cemetery outside of the centre of Tallinn, and the ethnic Russians didn't like this too much, and certainly stirred up by agents from the Kremlin and fake news, before the word fake news was a big deal, and lots of agitators literally going into the crowds. It started 2 days of riots in Estonia. So the legacies of what happened in that time are very vivid and very active, and have an impact on the lives and politics of that country today. And that's true everywhere along that border. The question about how geopolitics affects the individual people's stories, what was fascinating about that was the guy who actually drove me to that statue was a Belarusian taxi driver. So it was great to hear his insights and his thoughts from it, because when I'd been there before, I'd only been there with the Estonian Defence Force, which is the Estonian Reserve Military. So very much had their point of view on it. So it's quite good to hear both people's opinions, or both sides' opinions. But geopolitics is always talked about when journalists go and interview academics or professionals or generals or political leaders. You don't often hear it from the people on the front line, hundreds of miles, thousands of miles from these capitals and these centres of power, who are the people who will be the first ones to be affected if it all goes wrong. And for me, being in a military unit who would have to go and fight if a war were to occur on that border, this almost had an existential feeling to me. If I don't understand this, and if other people get this wrong, then there could be conflict, and I would be one of the people sent to get involved in that conflict.
And on the journey, you said you went through Ukraine and got to visit Chernobyl.
Yeah,
that must have been a very interesting experience. It seems like a very surreal landscape to adventure in.
Yeah, I mean, I remember studying Chernobyl. I just about remember the legacy of it happening on the news. I was 4 or 5 when it happened. So maybe I don't remember the actual event happening, but I can remember bits and pieces on TV in the years afterwards. And I do remember learning about it at GCSE Geography and thinking, wow, this is a really interesting thing. I'd like to find out more about this, or maybe go and see it one day. So to actually be able to go and see it was something I'd always wanted to do. But it's a fascinating place because the radiation is undoubtedly causes problems for the people there. And the whole area has been evacuated. But the impact of that is you've got an area that is effectively wilderness and has rewilded itself, because no one's farming this land. Not many people. There's a few people that have returned, self-settlers. So there's really good populations of wild animals in that area. The the cooling ponds for the old nuclear reactors are still stocked with massive fish because no one's fishing because they don't want to consume the radiation from it. So it's quite a remarkable place to go and see. And there's these amazing relics of the Soviet Union there. Obviously, you've got the reactor. You've got 2 reactors that they started building that they never finished. But actually, the other 3 reactors carried on working until about 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago. So remarkably, even after Chernobyl had its disaster, the other reactors continued working.
Were they at the same site as the one that exploded? They were next to that site.
One is back to back. It's the same building. It's the other side of the building. So that's reactor 4. That's reactor 3. So it's back to back with reactor 4.
Bloody hell.
Yeah, reactor 4 is the one that blew up, and reactor 3 backs onto it. There were people working in that until 15 years ago.
Wow, that's incredible. And so I take it that you had a Geiger count or radiation detector when you were there, and you could...
Yeah, I mean, as you go around the whole area, I don't know if you saw the HBO series, but what they did at the end of the cleanup process, this was another thing that linked part of my journeys together. Whilst I was up in Estonia, I got chatting to a guy that ran a restaurant in Tallinn, and he remembers his father disappearing for 6 months. His dad went to work one day and didn't come back. And then 6 months later, he turned up again. And it turns out what had happened is he'd gone to work. It's right, you've got to go and deliver this, I think it was a tractor, got to go and deliver it to the army compound. Well, okay, went and delivered it to the compound. They locked the gates behind him and said, right, you're going to Chernobyl to help clean it up. And what they did was they press ganged people from across the Soviet Union and forced them to go and work on the cleanup sites of Chernobyl. And he wasn't able to call his... They said to him, you're going to Chernobyl, you'll never see your family again. And they put him on cattle trucks, sent him down there, and it was his job. Luckily for him, he wasn't within the super dangerous area. He was on the external area driving people around. But yeah, there were these people that were just sent to Chernobyl to clean up the area. And then all the quick kit and equipment that they finished with, they dug big pits and buried it, covered it in concrete. And any of the animals that they shot and killed, they buried them in concrete pits. So as you go around, there are these mounds with radiation signs on them, which is where they cut down trees, because trees absorbed a lot of it, cut down trees, buried it, and then just buried it in soil. So you've just got these radioactive pits kicking about. And, you definitely should not go wandering in the woods there on your own. It's not because you're going to meet radioactive monsters, but you might end up in one of these pits. It's been unmarked or the earth has been disturbed or something. But, the Geiger counters we had, the highest I saw was 4 times what you'd get in central London. So, that's still far below what you're going to get on an intercontinental flight. So it's a place where tourism is starting to happen, and I think part of the reason is as Ukraine aligned itself more with the West, they're very keen to show how dastardly the Russians were and how Chernobyl happened. So there's like a political element to that as well.
I'm sure it must have been very interesting to, I don't know if you did see the HBO series that happened, but to compare sort of your journey and the comments of the people with the story that was laid out in that series.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an academic or an expert on Chernobyl, but the stories that I was told and the things that I saw align very well with what I saw in that series. It's pretty impressive. Actually, I've got to listen to the podcast about it. I know they did a podcast series about how they made it. And the attention to detail is excellent. It gave you a real sense of the Soviet Union, I thought.
Did you get to speak to any of the people who were living then inside the radiation boundary? Or did they? Yeah,
there was a guy who was a self-settler. He was he'd worked on the factory. I knew he definitely worked on the cleanup. But he and his wife got forced to leave their house and go and live in Kiev. And then one day he just decided, do you know what? I don't want to live in the city. I'm going to go back to my land and keep on farming my land. He was in his 80s. His wife had only died a couple of years ago. But on average, the self-settlers that return to the exclusion zone, that's the area they've been kicked out of, they live longer than the people who've been moved out of the exclusion zone and moved into the cities. Just think about that for a second. Those who return to the exclusion zone tend to live longer. And I think it's very much because that's where they want to be. So there's a whole host of stuff beyond the impact of the radiation on the body. I mean, I haven't done enough research to look at the impact of radiation in Chernobyl. and the exclusion zone. I know that there's been lots of people with thalidomide or kids born with deformities and so on. Not people with thalidomide, people with thyroid issues and kids born with deformities. But the people like him who've gone back to live there, they're farming their own land. They're in their home. They're in the place that they want to be. They're doing active work outside. They're not in a city. So there's a whole host of stuff that is keeping them alive for longer.
Bit of a statement on the lifestyle issues of living in a city, maybe.
Yeah, living in a city more dangerous than living in a nuclear exclusion zone. Well, that's quite a powerful statement.
So to move on to some of the other journeys that you've done, a lot of them have been on foot. When you did the Walking the Himalayas and Walking the Nile programs with Levison Wood, a lot of those journeys are on foot. What do you think it is about being on foot that's an attractive way of traveling for a travel writer or adventurer?
So I think there's some very pragmatic elements. One, it's cheap. So you don't have to worry about a lot of costs. Two, it's fairly simple. You don't have to think too much about it. You just go in a direction you go. So there's those sort of like boring pragmatic things. It's slow, so you're forced to take in your surroundings. You're also really aware of the transition from one place to the next. You go from one area of London to another on the tube. All you know is the places you want to go, the area around the tube, and then the next place you're at in the area around the tube. Whereas if you walk, you get a sense of how the neighbourhoods are changing. Like, these houses look like they were built in the sort of tenements from the late 19th century, where there's big blocks of red brick flats where workers would have lived, and then you go into terraced houses, and then you go past the mansions and then the parks. So you start to get a sense of how everything fits together. So that gives you a much better sense of place and sense of transition, and everything starts to make sense. It's like words in a sentence rather than words on their own, if that makes sense. Makes sense. So there's those advantages. And also you're not intimidating or unusual to people. So you're like, oh, here's a bloke on foot. I walk on foot. Yeah, he's like me. And because you're going slow, you're more likely to interact with people. So, travel writing is a product of source material, interactions and events. You're more likely to have those if you're on foot. And then there's much more, I guess, fundamental and pseudo-spiritual elements. Humans have evolved to walk bipedally and to migrate and to be hunter-gatherers and to work in tribes. So being on foot is very natural. And it's actually something we don't do very often. So when you spend extended periods of time walking, it completely alters everything. I find that I'm just happy when I'm walking. I'm not bored. I'm not in need of distraction. I feel fit, I feel strong, I feel healthy. My mind starts to change. It's almost like meditation constantly. So there's a whole host of real benefits to walking as against traveling by any other means.
I can definitely relate to that. There's something really special about walking, even through places that you already know, but even more so exploring new areas on foot. It just gives you a real sense of the energy of a place. And
I walk around London all the time. It's the best way to explore.
Yeah, for sure. And I understand you didn't sort of go in your own gear. You adopted the clothing and fashion of the people in the area so that you'd, to an extent.
From place to place. Like the first stretch when we were in Uganda, we were just, if I was adopting the fashion of what everybody else wore, I'd be wearing an Arsenal shirt because that's what most of the people wore in Uganda. But we wore, Lev was sponsored by Crag Hoppers at the time, so we wore Crag Hoppers gear because we could get that for free. I wore old-boy boots. It's very much, normal hiking in the mountains of England or walking around the Peak District, that kind of gear. Just because it was hot, it was humid, it was scrambling up and down, difficult terrain. So that was the right kit to wear, and it was the easiest kit to wear. When we got to the desert, when we got to Sudan, they're much less used to Western culture, much less used to, fewer people wear Western clothing. Many people still wear traditional clothing there. And it's also a place where you don't really want to stand out too much because it's a police state. So it's better if you can blend in a little bit rather than standing out. Just reduces the amount of trouble you might get from the authorities. Not that you're doing anything wrong. But also, when we were just crossing the desert, it was by far the best gear to wear. You know, if you're wearing
just practical,
yeah, it's just practical. It was cool. It was white. It kept the sun off. Wore like effectively like a turban around our heads. It was just by far the best gear to wear for that heat. It got up to 52 degrees in the desert.
Sweltering. And that was walking around like 15, 20, 25 miles a day?
Yeah, more. We got up to 56 kilometers one day, which is 30 miles.
All right. Had to train up the feet to resist the blisters on that one.
Yeah, I did actually like practice walking, walk like 5-6 miles a day before I went there. Yeah, I mean, I think any journey you go on, no matter how woke you think you are, you're going to have preconceptions, and it's really important to have to be open to thinking of how can you explore those preconceptions and have them shattered. The most useful one for me was observing that so many people wore Arsenal shirts and then thinking, why do they all wear Arsenal shirts? Arsenal aren't a particularly good team. They haven't been a good team for quite a long time. I don't know if you're an Arsenal fan, but you know, it's definitely the truth that they're not a great team these days. And I think, sorry?
I was like, they could have picked a better shirt.
Well, I was just curious as to why were these guys all wearing Arsenal shirts? And it turns out the reason is that when the Premier League became international, Arsenal were a good team. They just had loads of black players in their team at that time, which really meant that for those young lads watching the best league in the world, they could see themselves in those players. Therefore, they had an affinity to that team, to Arsenal. And so it was really good to sort of realise that there are people that think in the same kind of way. They love football like people do in England, and you can have a chat about football. Stuff like that just breaks down these barriers where you think, oh, they're all exotic. And I think it's very easy to orientalise and exoticize places when you go away. I mean, one of the great problems in travel writing, travel storytelling, and travel television, definitely in the UK, is it's all done by white men, and they can't help but repeat some of the old cliches and behaviours that come from an imperial legacy and imperial past. So I think it'd be good to see a bit more diversity in the travel world, just because you have people who are taking ideas of, well, no, they're not that exotic. They're just like my uncle, you know? And I think those sorts of approaches, that will have a big impact on the way travel journalism is done, to reducing the othering and exoticizing of people when you travel.
What are your thoughts on mainstream travel as it is at the moment? The way people are traveling, do you think we are traveling in the most natural way, or do you think there's a way that people can improve and get more out of it?
I mean, the most natural way to travel is on foot, with your entire tribe and family, and a couple of spears and bows and arrows. But I don't really see that taking off again anytime soon. I think like the desire to travel and curiosity is inbuilt into humans. It's probably a genetically evolved trait and a culturally evolved trait that has become very useful, because it's through discovery and movement that humans have become such a successful animal on Earth. So I think like the instinct to travel is always going to be there. In terms of how people travel, there's such a variety. There's the sightseers who go to places just to take photos. There's the people who go to see family. There's those who go for work. There's those who do independent travel, package tours, resort tours, backpacking. And then you've kind of got the slightly more curious, educational traveller who might go for learning about history or geography or something like that. I think it's very easy to patronise people who are just going for sightseeing tours or holidays. My girlfriend often says to me, "Can we just go on a holiday and sit on a beach, please, rather than going to walk somewhere or going to learn something?" So I think it's a shame if people don't travel in ways which are slightly more beneath the surface. But then really it is what people used to do on the hippie trail. I suppose that was fairly groundbreaking. No one was travelling that far back in the days of the hippie trail, when people travelled overland to India. And then as people started to backpack around Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, Laos, in the early days, that was certainly pretty courageous, really, because there wasn't the setup for it. Well, I suppose you had the legacy of the Americans being in Vietnam in the Vietnam War has certainly meant that there was some tourist infrastructure there. But, now when people say, oh, they're going backpacking around Southeast Asia, is that really any more adventurous than going on a package holiday to Spain? I mean, you've probably got a bit more freedom, but it's not that much discovery.
Yeah.
It's culturally different, which I think is definitely a good thing. And it's good that people do it. But is it adventurous? Are they really engaging with that culture? Or are they going there just to get cheap booze, cheap food, and shag other people from the country that they come from? Not that there's anything wrong with this, but is that really adventurous, or is it doing exactly what we do in Ibiza in Spain, but just doing it in Cambodia? I'm not one to say that the way I travel is better than the way everyone else travels. It's the way that I get fulfillment from my travel. And, when I started my travel by going backpacking around India, doing all those things that everyone does in other places. And it was great. I really enjoyed it. But for me, when I went to India, I also had this thing of wanting to learn about my heritage, which was Indian. And that was really where I think this notion of the travel that I do now with a sense of curiosity and underpinning it with self-education came from. Now, I find that more rewarding. But if other people want to go traveling just to have fun, there's nothing wrong with that. I think the things to really think about when we're traveling is, what are we doing for others, for those communities, and more widely for the planet? So it's all well and good traveling and not using plastic straws. I think that's really good. That's one form of environmental damage. But then the other form of environmental damage is flying by planes, or just a lot of the consumer lifestyle that is involved in travel, and the energy, the carbon, the resources that are used up for me to go and enjoy another part of the world. So it's something that I'm still trying to work out. I'm still trying to wrestle with. I think it's very important to go and engage with other cultures. I think it's wonderful to go and see other parts of the world. My career is based on getting on planes and consuming huge amounts of fuel and generating carbon dioxide. And effectively, when I'm travel writing, encouraging other people to do that. So there's definitely an ethical and moral problem I have around that type of travel in and of itself, or as in flying. But I think, yes, there are types of travel that are more damaging than others, whether that's exploitative, whether that's overconsumption of resources. Going all the way to southern Spain, where it's really pretty dry, to play golf in watercourses that are irrigated and already water-stressed environment. I think that's bad travel.
Yeah.
So yes, there are good and bad forms of travel for the environment. Supporting operators or ideas that actually do give money back to the local community and actually engage them, rather than just setting up massive Trump hotels and resorts in places and just employing people from outside that area. So yeah, there's good and bad ethical travel, I think.
I think it is extremely important that if people are traveling, it's a real, as much as it can be, a cultural exchange, because it's also an opportunity for them to learn about you. I guess that's less needed in like those areas in Vietnam where people are going there to get drunk and go on their like gap year kind of stuff. I think they've probably heard enough about our culture, but yeah, there's a real value for both sides if it's done properly.
But I think those are examples of areas where it's probably more valuable, because all they see is drunk Brits and Aussies getting drunk and misbehaving in the street, and all those people see of the Vietnamese or the Cambodians is somebody to sell them cheap booze or get them some drugs. That's not cultural exchange. Eating pad thai is not cultural exchange. Well, it's better than never having eaten pad thai, but is it genuine cultural exchange? Not really. I knew a guy who went and lived as a monk in northern Thailand for 6 months. That's cultural exchange. He then went back and had fun getting drunk in Bangkok and everything as well. But he then had a real engagement and love of that culture and that country, and in fact spoke the language. I do think, even in those places, there's good cultural exchange can happen.
I remember I actually went to Thailand myself and tried to really steer my way away from the main routes of travel for a lot of travelers there. And I ended up on an island which was basically only a tourist destination for other Thai people. And it was really interesting to just experience that. And I did a lot of traveling there like on foot. So obviously you get around maybe on like a moped or a bus, and then once you got to an area you travel on foot. And I walked to the top of this tower where a monk was sitting. He was watching this like boxing match on his TV, and he just saw us sort of inquisitively looking around the corner. He had almost like it was like a weird sort of cave in the side of this hill. And he had a TV plugged in somehow, and he was eating a yogurt, and then I was with my girlfriend at the time, and he offered us yogurts, and we just sat with this monk and tried to have very like primitive communication whilst watching this boxing match. And it was really like a lesson in spontaneity, but also, as you were saying, about just embracing journeys on foot and connecting people at their local level. It was something really special.
Well, something else I think is really good is to try and do that in your own country, because it's so easy to go, oh, there's nothing to learn about England. And, you know, there's so much to learn. I've not seen any of the Peak District, really. I've seen a couple of towns and a few hills in the Peak District. I've not seen, I know nothing about the Northeast. I barely know Manchester, even though I've got family from there. I'd love to go and see Cornwall. I've been to a few places in Cornwall, but those are places that are really culturally quite different to London, massively culturally different. And that's not even looking at going to Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. So you don't have to go to the other side of the world to have these amazing exchanges and cultural experiences and to learn something about a place and their values. You know, if I go and spend time with somebody who still works in a heavy industry up in the northeast of England, that's a world away from where I come from, even though we still speak the same language. Although Geordie's quite hard to understand. I think it's important to try and retain those approaches that we take to other places back home and have that same curiosity and compassion for our fellow countrymen, I think.
You've done a fair amount of your trips as a solo journey. Do you think that a lot of people should embrace that and do a solo journey at least once in their life?
Yeah, I think you should definitely do solo travel. You can start, there's two ways to do it. You can throw yourself in at the deep end and learn, or you can gradually work your way into it by starting with smaller trips. I mean, there's people will have safety concerns, but generally most safety concerns, if you do your research and you go to places which are safe, that's not really much of an issue. So I think that's just a case of doing your research, doing your planning, and it doesn't happen as often as you think. I believe bad things don't happen as often as they think. The personal reward and the joy that you get from it is enormous, because if you're traveling with somebody else, you do have to think about what do they want to do. You have to consider them, you have to consider what their interests are, and you'll probably spend most of your time talking to them. Not that there's anything wrong with that. That's a wonderful way to travel. I really enjoy traveling with my girlfriend. But when you're traveling on your own, you are much more likely to have to engage with people. People are much more likely to talk to you because they see you on your own. And you can do what you want every day. You don't have to think about anyone else. That's an extremely liberating feeling. It can be very lonely at times as well, definitely. But overall, I would say it's one of the best ways, one of the best things you can do is to go and do at least one solo journey.
If you were going to write a sort of the miniature values Bible of a good traveller, if you were going to pick three things as values to take with you on your travels, what would you pick?
Curiosity. You definitely have to be curious. That has to be one of your values. I think empathy. So you need to be able to you need to work hard to understand why people do those things. What's their background? So, it's really easy when going through Russia is a good example. Particularly if you're in the British military, you are focused on Russia being a potential threat. And how do you plan on the ground level on a military way to deal with that? And then you hear in the news Russia is an adversary. So you presume that Russians are adversaries. You need to go there and think, well, actually, what's it like for them? So why is Putin popular in Russia? Why is it easy to say that the West is being aggressive? And you go there and you stand on that side of the border and you learn about the 1.5 million people who died in St. Petersburg during the siege by the Germans, and the really deep belief within Russia that they were betrayed by their European allies in 1941 when Germany invaded Russia in Operation Barbarossa. Now, whether or not you agree with their analysis that the West is being aggressive against Russia again, it's important to understand what the background and their beliefs are that allow that belief to happen, what has happened in the past. So to empathise and to not just go, well, you're wrong. Well, you know, they might be mistaken in their belief about Western aggression, but their fear and their belief is very real and valid to them. So to have that empathy and understand why things are different. Now, that's not to say you can't be objective about certain things. I think the way the homophobia and the misogyny that you see, especially in places in Eastern Europe, places in parts of the United States of America, intolerance, these are things that are objectively wrong. You have to be careful about telling people that when you're in those countries, but to empathise with understanding where that comes from, whilst also understanding for yourself that I personally believe those things are objectively wrong. So empathy is definitely the second one. So curiosity, empathy. I don't know what the third one is. I'll have to come back to you on that.
All right, we'll leave it at 2. Short and sweet. What do you feel from your travels people most often get wrong about our culture here in the UK?
In Eastern Europe, they were very surprised that there were brown people in England. I would tell people I was from England, they're like, no, you're not. Like, yes, I am. No, you're not. You're brown. We have brown people in England. No, they don't. Okay, I'm a brown person from England, so I'm telling you that does happen. So I think that is one of the things I found really curious in Eastern Europe. People just telling me that I was wrong about where I was from. Eastern Europe, mostly Russia, rather than the Baltic states. But they're sort of a bit more aware of that kind of thing, being part of the European Union. What else do people get wrong about Britain? Well, no, that's probably the main one that I thought of. Again, in Russia, this belief that we all hate Russians and spend all of our time thinking about attacking Russia, which is obviously what Putin tells them. But I'm really sorry, I hate to break it to you guys, but we don't think about Russia very often. I don't. I mean, I did when I was in the army and doing this journey, but that's a product of their beliefs that they're told over there. In Uganda, had some quite funny ones about our recent misdemeanors. Apparently, in parts of Africa, they generally believe that AIDS was spread by the KGB. Wrong. AIDS was spread by the CIA and MI6, although that was actually a KGB disinformation plan called Operation Infection that was genuinely spread by the Russians in the 1980s. What else is there?
About our government that we'd spread. So they wanted to educate those people that we'd spread the virus.
Yeah, so there's this Russian KGB disinformation project called Operation Infection, spelled with a K, and what they basically did was spread the rumours that HIV was a disease created by the West, by the CIA and MI6, and spread CIA specifically, and they had all these dodgy scientists writing it up and then getting that in papers in communist supporting papers in India and then in East Germany and Africa.
Wow, incredible.
Watch out for disinformation, fake news.
Exactly, it's all around us. If there was 1 week left on this planet, to say there's an alien race, they come and pointing a laser gun at the planet, they're going to blow it up in a week, and you get to travel to one more place. Which one are you going to pick and what are you going to try and do?
I'd probably be with my mum and my sister and my girlfriend, now fiance. We would probably just go camping, and I'd quite happily do that in Windsor, go into the Great Park, maybe go up to Glencoe in Scotland. But it'd be very much about being with them and just going for walks and having picnics. I think the place that maybe I would go and do it would be, New Zealand is one of the most beautiful places on earth. It's just stunning, absolutely remarkable. So to go and do it there, my mum loves New Zealand as well. That'd be pretty cool. So yeah, I think it's more about the people I'd be with than specifically where I would go. Where else do I have left that I really, really want to travel? I'd quite like to see Indonesia. I've not seen any of Indonesia yet.
Oh, congratulations, by the way. I think that's a fantastic answer. As you were saying, there's some really fantastic experiences that we can have in our own country. There's a real depth, and even doing simple things such as like going camping, spending time in nature. It's a really nice way to connect with the people that you love, or just meet others as well.
And there's probably three things you can do that you will not get bored doing and will stop you looking at your phone. One is to sit in the ocean and just look at the waves. Another is to sit around a campfire and just look at the fire. And another is to, on a clear night, just look up at the stars. You can do those things for hours and not get bored.
With the work that you're doing, what's the impact that you'd like to have on the world?
Good question. I would like to reduce fear of other cultures, and I would like to allow us to be better informed. Particularly at the moment when we've got things like nuclear weapons and increased use of AI, and the fact that we're going to have to work together as a planet to deal with the threats that are coming our way: climate change, ecological collapse, AI, and nuclear weapons. We need to have less fear of each other. We need to be able to trust and understand each other and work together to overcome those problems. So we need to reduce isolationism and nationalism. And I think travel is one of the ways to do that, by revealing insights about places. So that's something that I feel is quite important. I would like to reveal better the impact of our choices. So not just looking at the release of CO2. I think there's a lot of people doing some really good work on that. But the destruction of resources and the consumption of resources and the destruction of the natural world to enable that and to fulfill that. I think there's so few wild places left. Whilst I love all of the BBC documentaries that Attenborough has done, I think it's been really good in the last couple that they've shown that those beautiful wild places are actually much smaller and much fewer than we think they are.
Yeah.
So I think reading some things around that, those are two areas that I'm trying to move more into,
I think there's a real thirst, with movements like Extinction Rebellion really coming into their own, and a lot of people more aware about the impact of their lives on the planet. I think there's a real thirst for knowledge about how people can travel in a more sustainable way and impact less. So it'd be great for you to be able to showcase that too. Yeah.
Traveling with trains, I think I'm going to have to accept that before too long, I'm going to have to stop flying at all and just take trains everywhere. It means it'll take me a long time to get anywhere past Eastern Europe.
I think there's a lot to be gained though. If you're taking on a slow journey, you'll see places that you never would have seen before. Traveling by train into, if I on my next snowboarding holiday want to go to France, maybe I can take the train over instead of flying, and go to Port Saint Maurice and take in something new. For your career, what do you say is the proudest moment of your career so far?
Doing the New Iron Curtain from a professional perspective is probably the best thing I've done. It was highly self-conceived, self-funded, self-researched, and then self-created all of the content. I had a mate coming along to do some of the filming with me, and then creating the podcast Edgelands off the back of that. So from a sort of professional perspective, in terms of what I've achieved, that's probably the highlight, or the highest point in terms of single project. I did a talk on stage for the Moth storytelling at the Union Chapel in London. And I think of all the things I've done, that was the one that was the most fulfilling, most emotional, and most rewarding. I told the story about taking my dad's ashes to India to put them in the Ganges. And you had to tell that story on stage without any notes to 900 people for 15 minutes. That was probably the most powerful thing that I've done personally. It's quite cathartic. And what would be another one that I found really fulfilling? Getting on BBC Radio 4's From Our Own Correspondent was certainly great, really cool thing to have been able to do. But I guess the best one's going to be the first, which is when I wrote the story about taking my dad's ashes to India in the Telegraph. That was my first paid commission for a national newspaper, and to get in the Telegraph to tell that story, and that was it. That was brilliant, fantastic,
amazing to be sharing that personal journey with so many people.
Yeah, that was wonderful. we're very privileged to have been able to do that.
When I'm sure as anyone would, you encounter struggles on your travel. What's the mindset and the underlying power that gets you through there?
I think the first thing is to remember that you have chosen to be there. No one else has sent you there. You have made that choice to go and be on that journey, to do that thing, be in that location. That's a choice that very few people on this planet have. So part of it is no more boo-hoo. Get off the ambulance and just go, actually, this is not that bad. So there's that there's gratitude, which is just going, wow, actually, let's think about the things that are really good here. And then there's a pragmatic approach, right? Okay, what's the problem and what's the solution? What's gone wrong here and how do I have to fix it? So those first two are mindsets, and the third is a practical solution, I would say. That tends to be how I've dealt with them from an emotional perspective. That's something that's easier said than done, but I think, unless something really bad has happened, it's probably not that bad. It's not something you can't fix in 15 minutes or for 50 quid. Generally, those are the two things you need to fix most of your travel problems: 15 minutes or 50 quid.
What scares you in the world?
What scares me? I'm not familiar enough with snakes to be able to overcome my instinctive fear of them. So when I see snakes, I'm like, shit. So I'd like to be a bit more comfortable with them. Losing a loved one, that scares me. The idea of that happening, or being away and not being able to come back to help them when they need me, that scares me. The blindness of consumption and a lack of willingness to reconsider that maybe permanent GDP and economic growth is not the best way to run countries or the best way to live as a society. I think that's probably the biggest background existential fear for me at the moment, which is you watch Trump and Johnson on television talking about things that are the wrong way to deal with issues. And I think that scares me, because those things will have a big impact on my life and my kids' lives.
Yeah, it's very clear that there's a real disconnection between people making decisions and the well-being of just normal people throughout the world. Seems to be a big disconnection. Yeah.
I think that's partly a generational thing as well. If you look at who's behind Extinction Rebellion, it's young, or the school strikes. That stuff that needs to come together, that community, that communalism, is extant, as in it's there in young people in a way that it just isn't in the older generations. I think Brexit probably represents similar things, an isolationism versus communalism. So there's a real generational gap between the decision makers and the people that will inherit the earth. Yeah,
for sure. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Lev Wood once told me that the hardest thing to do is to get to the start line, that it's really easy to come up with an idea. It's really easy to finish an expedition once you've started it. The hardest thing is to get from the idea to the start line of the expedition or project. So just remembering that was quite a useful thing. Just trying to think. Piece of advice. Normally I can come up with quite a good answer for this one, but I can't think of any right now.
I think that's pretty profound, though, getting to the start line. There's always such the practicalities of breaking down a dream once you've sort of had a vision of what you want to do. It's always very humbling observing the amount of work that it takes to get to that position, especially with travel. So many things to think about.
Yeah, and that's very much the stuff behind the scenes. So that's a piece of advice, more of an encounter, and something that I learned was from the Dalai Lama when we met him on Walking the Himalayas. And he told me the story of how he'd learned about secrecy and visas from the Chinese communists. And that was amazing, because it was wonderful to hear, humbling to hear a man who was the leader of a people who were being murdered, oppressed, ethnically cleansed by the Chinese, to hear him show some compassion for the Chinese to express something he learned from them. I mean, the man is the incarnation of the god of compassion, so you would think the Dalai Lama would be compassionate, but it was still just quite a powerful lesson to hear from somebody.
It must have been an incredible experience meeting the Dalai Lama.
Yeah. Oh, and don't forget to have fun. That wasn't from the Dalai Lama, but that's quite a good idea.
And what advice would you tell to the 18-year-old Ash at the start of his journey?
It'll be okay. Just don't worry. It'll be okay. Enjoy everything because it won't come again. Don't worry so much. It'll be fine. It will be fine.
Fantastic. And before I ask the last question of the conversation, where can people find you and connect with you if they'd like to follow your work or let you know what they thought of the conversation?
Was the Twitter and Instagram are the two ones that I use a bit. I stick photos and do stories up on Instagram, but Twitter's probably the easiest way to converse with me.
Yeah.
Both of those are at Ash Bhardwaj, so that's at AshBhardwaj, at Ash Bhardwaj. My website is www.ashbhardwaj.com. I put blogs up on there and work that I've been doing. So, drop me a tweet or Instagram. Those are probably the two best ways to get in touch with me.
Wicked. And I'll make sure to put the links for those into the show notes as well so people can get in contact with you. And finally, what's next on the agenda for Ash? Like, have you got any travels lined up?
Yeah, I've got a couple of projects that I'm working on, a few ideas that I'm trying to develop at the moment. One of them is about taking a journey through India. So going from Peshawar, which is now Pakistan, all the way through to Kolkata, and then going down into the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And that project is based on some family history. I had a great uncle who was arrested in Peshawar for trying to attack the British. And he ended up being imprisoned in this place. As someone who's an Army Reserve officer in the British Army Reserve today, that is quite an odd notion that I would be on the wrong side of things with my family. Yeah. So I want to go and retrace that journey. Also going to go back to New Zealand for a while, go and do a piece about Māori culture, Māori heritage, and possibly off to South Africa in December. So a few projects lined up.
Exciting stuff. All right, well, Ash, that brings us to the end of the conversation. It's been wonderful to chat with you and hear all of your stories and learnings from travels around the world and at home.
Brilliant.
Everyone, you've been listening to Second Mind, the show that fuels you to be the greatest version of yourself and better the world. If you've enjoyed the conversation today, please do like, subscribe, and also connect with Ash and let him know what you thought of the conversation, and share it with the people around you so we can keep the movement and energy going. Thank you all for listening, and until next time, stay true.